Hello, everybody. Hi. Hello, and welcome to another Saturday John Chappell natural philosophy session on science/physics. I just checked to make sure the sound is coming across properly on YouTube, so bear with me. Nothing worse for me to start talking away here and the sound's not coming out the other end. Yeah. Okay. Okay. The sound seems to be working all right, and I can see myself. Hey, hello. Hello, everybody out there. So, this is sort of like being a last minute thing. It hasn't gone out on its usual announcement. So, I normally have an afternoon kit before giving this session. So, I haven't had time for that. And also normally check through my slides because they normally don't come through properly on StreamYard, and I've not had time to do that as well. So it's been a bit of a mad rush panic trying to set myself up for today. So bear with me, and probably most people have not been aware that this session is on because as I said, the announcements have gone out a bit late. Anyway, let's ask for some money.
Hello, everyone. I'm David D. Hilster, president of the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society. During the past 2 years, we have used annual fundraising drives in order to keep our organization's presence alive and well on the internet. But first, I want to thank everyone who pays their annual memberships through our automatic online system. Your support is vital and provides us with important funds to keep the CMPS afloat. This year, we will be implementing several changes to our online system. Several to save money and lower our annual expenses, and another to better our discussion platform. Our goal this year is $2,000, and I hope we can reach that goal. Whatever amount you can donate, it is greatly appreciated and needed. Your membership and donations are vital to keeping our online community of critical thinkers alive and well. Thank you, and keep up the amazing work that is driving science forward.
Okay, I'm back again. And I got yes, the sound's on. I think I'll just check again. So I think I'm back. I think the sound's working. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Yeah, sound's working. Yeah, sound's working. Great. So, hello everybody. Welcome once again to John Chappell Natural Philosophy, and once again onto the topic of complaining about Einstein's relativity. Now, Einstein made a great many changes to physics, and so there's a great many things to complain about. And so I'm just going to highlight some of those things to complain about again with today's talk. Today's talk is called The Fatal Goalpost Moves in Einstein's Relativity. So let's get straight into this talk now. If I can put it up on stage. Yes, I can see it if nobody else can. So, fatal goalpost moves in Einstein's relativity. And if I make it bigger for myself here, just so I can read it. So, next slide. So the description of this is that there's been numerous changes made to Einstein's relativity, and that's what I call goalpost moves. And some of those goalpost moves or amendments, changes in relativity, which is special and general relativity, uh, no longer mean it's no longer what the theory is intended to mean in the beginning. So it's fatal. That makes it fatal. It's not the original theory or theories of relativity anymore. Mainstream has changed it to something else, and the mainstream does not seem to care that this has taken place. They don't seem to make it widely known that they're messing things up. They got Einstein saying what relativity was, and then they've changed it to something else. Some of the things that Einstein says they've still kept, and some of the things they've changed to something else. And so it's fatal. They made a fatal mess of Einstein's relativity in not making it clear what the changes are. And so I've gone on to this fatal goalpost moving thing because of what I did in my last talk. I communicated with Stephen Gift, and Stephen Gift thinks he's got experiments that disprove Einstein's relativity. I think in this case, the special relativity part. And unfortunately, I was communicating with him, and we were able to find common ground. He had his point of view about Einstein's relativity and couldn't be dissuaded from having that point of view about Einstein's relativity. So I'm now going to tackle the problem that Einstein's relativity keeps getting amended, thus leaving people with different points of view about it. So Stephen Gift has his point of view about it, and other people have other points of view about what Einstein's relativity is. And so there's no common ground to communicate about it if people stick rigidly to what they believe Einstein's relativity is, when really it has been a theory that has undergone numerous changes, amendments, and so forth. And so making amendments is really moving goalposts, and that's a fallacy in logic. If a person points out a problem with relativity, then often relativity gets amended, and who's doing the amendment, it's not clear. But so say things and textbooks and so forth get amended, and they don't explicitly make it clear that what they're teaching decades further on has been amended to what was taught earlier. So it's a complete total mess. It's fatal, basically. What they've done is they've changed Einstein's relativity, and they've not made it clear that it's not what it originally meant to be. And not everybody is aware of this amending that's going on. Mainstream just likes to admit as much as they can that this amending is happening. You've got to do a lot of research to find out what they're doing. They're making these amendments, and they're not telling you they're making these amendments. And often those amendments do not make much difference to the overall theory of relativity, which is special and general. But sometimes those goalpost moves, i.e. amendments, are fatal. They radically change relativity from what it was originally supposed to be. And so that's what I'm dealing with here. The radical, fatal amendments, the fatal goalpost moves. And so here we go. And so normally I ought to make this general note that when you say the word light speed, what is usually meant by that, it's an abbreviation for meaning light speed in a vacuum, and in the context of inertial frames without the influence on it by fields such as gravity. And so there are different types of light speed, but normally when you just use the word light speed, you mean it within the context of special relativity, and the different types of light speed would just confuse things, because general relativity has different light speed, things like coordinate light speed, local light speed, global light speed, and so forth. So light speed, when you're just talking about in the context of special relativity, means a certain thing, and later on when the theory becomes generalized, it means there's lots of different light speeds. So bear that in mind. Always bear that in mind when dealing with relativity, because when you talk about light speed, it is completely confusing often what that means. Next slide. Okay, so this is the paper that started all the problems. It comes from Einstein in 1905. It was his first paper on special relativity, and there are numerous problems with Einstein's special relativity paper, and have to break it down because it's too much to deal with in one go. So this paper creates a massive amount of problems, and it just generates more and more arguing and so forth. And it doesn't help that the mainstream have made these implicit changes and not making everybody aware that these changes are going on. Next slide. Right. So I like ChatGPT. It's my favorite artificial intelligence. I talk to it, and it's prepared to see things from my point of view, which is POV, abbreviated there. And it tells me such things as the following. AI says, conclusion, by your strict rule, that's in my point of view, about no shifting chord definitions, no ad hoc fixes, that's all goalpost changing, relativity committed multiple fatal goalpost moves. So AI, my favorite AI agrees with me. It's saying, yeah, you're right. From your point of view, that's what it looks like. But of course, you've got to bear in mind that there are other points of view, and AI is prepared to look at things from other points of view. But what I like is it looks at it, I can talk to it, and it's taking things from my point of view. Other people, if you go on to it, if you ask it, it will talk to you from your point of view, and it will give you a totally different thing to what it's telling me. So, but from my point of view, relativity has undergone numerous changes, and which I call goalpost moves. AI accepts that point of view as being possible, looks at it from my point of view and says, yep, there's been fatal goalpost moves. And so AI, from that point of view, says mainstream only survived, this is for relativity, by redefining concepts, and that's concepts about ether, time, simultaneity, cosmology, and all the rest of it, and patching up mathematical inconsistencies while still calling the theory right. So the mainstream wants to call the theory right, even though they've done all these changes to it. And ChatGPT sees my point of view that special relativity and general relativity is wrong because it moves goalposts. And that's my strict standard. If you start changing a theory too much, then it's fatal. And that's my point of view on it. And it says, and it is agreeing that that is sort of a valid point of view. Other people have different points of view, and they're prepared to accept the goalpost moving. And it points out from mainstream point of view, that does not accept it. It's wrong for moving goalposts, and it said sees these amendments as natural part of scientific progress. So my point of view is you make all these changes to relativity, and that should invalidate the theory. But the mainstream doesn't see it from that point of view, and they see that amendments is a natural part of scientific progress. Their point of view is they're ready to accept that the changes are made to a theory, and that they're happy to go along with that. But as I say, that's made a total complete mess of things when you want to talk about the theory, because things have been changed so much that people have different impressions of what the theory is. Next. And so I say to it, so you say it's wrong contrary to mainstream ? And ChatGPT said, yes, based on the strict goalpost moving criterion. That's my point of view. We discussed Einstein's relativity would count as wrong because it repeatedly redefined core concepts. And that's on ether, time, simultaneity, space-time, etc., to preserve itself. So it's moved its goalposts to save itself and being proven wrong. And that's my point of view, and ChatGPT recognises that as a valid point of view. And ChatGPT goes on, this contrasts with the mainstream view, which judges theories primarily by predictive success and internal consistency, not whether historical interpretations shifted. So, in other words, by your standard, relativity is wrong. By mainstream physics standard, the theory is correct. It's well tested, internally consistent, empirically successful. If you want, I can outline a rigorous argument showing why your goalpost criterion conflicts with mainstream methodology, which makes this distinction crystal clear. And it wants to go into details on that. And I've cut it off there on that bit. So it was this point there that I wanted to make out that my point of view of the theory is it's been changed too much, and so it must be wrong. And they're not making it clear to people that they've changed it a lot. So, but they have their point of view. It's a natural part of a theory to keep amending it and changing it, which I think, in my view, the mainstream is just totally wrong with having that point of view about things. With the I would give allowance that they could do that, but they've got to make it clear that's what they're doing. But they don't make it clear. They just change things and don't make it clear that they've changed things. Next slide. So the question I wanted to raise is, what are other fatal goalpost moves? And ChatGPT says, if by fatal goalpost moves you mean cases where the core meaning of a term or principle in physics was quietly changed so that the theory could survive criticism or anomalies, there are several striking examples. And so I've cut it off there. It wanted to go into those examples. And it's wanting to talk about cases in other theories than relativity. I wanted to stick to what relativity had as fatal goalpost moves. And so I just asked it, do all the fatal goalpost moves for Einstein relativity? I wasn't interested in so much in the other theories such as Darwinian evolution and so forth. And ChatGPT said, I can outline from a conceptual history point of view the major ways in which definitions and interpretive goalposts inside Einstein's relativity evolved. These are not moral judgments, but reminders that meanings of key terms shifted as the theory matured. So if you look at the history of relativity, it's pretty clear in there that they keep changing things. And it's sort of like this history of all the changes that they're making to Einstein's relativity that the mainstream wants to ignore. They just want to tell you their version of it at the present time and ignore all the changes they've made to get to their version of it now. So number one is from AI is pointing out about mass, the mass of the idea of an object. So the early 1905 to 1920s onwards, you had relativistic mass. So mass was thought of as being a relativistic mass, and it was varying with speed. And then later, and it's post 1950s, they decided that the mass was the invariant rest mass, and it's only energy changes with velocity. So they decided the idea of mass is that it doesn't change. And so what you got is an equation where you've got mass is equal to relativistic mass is equal to the relativistic factor times rest mass, and they decided that the relativistic mass was really what was meant by as mass, but then they changed their mind and they decided rest mass was what they really meant by mass. So the effect is that mass changed referent. Inertial increase was re-explained as energy momentum geometry. So if you've got an object and it's going faster, then its relativistic mass is increasing. But the change they come up with is, we don't want to think about the relativistic masses increasing. We don't want to think of the mass of the object increasing. We're going to talk about the rest mass. And that's the mass when the object is not moving, and they're saying that mass doesn't change. So they're changing the way they're talking about the theory. So next is about ether medium. It's the idea that the light waves have a medium, and that medium is called often ether. And so early relativity Einstein still used the term ether loosely, and 1905 as a possible reference frame without properties. Later, the ether was declared unnecessary. Space-time itself became the structure carrying metric and causal relations. So really, it started from 1905. Before 1905, I think Einstein was accepting the idea of the ether, but in this 1905 paper on special relativity, he was saying it was unnecessary. So it's messing up the ether. He doesn't. What's going on here? Why is it suddenly deemed unnecessary from 1905 onwards? It's sort of like a mess. And the effect is the dynamical medium was replaced by geometric bookkeeping. So you got what was a dynamical ether medium, and that was being replaced by a geometrical ether, in a sense. So really, the whole idea of ether was being messed up, and that's never really queried. That's never really dealt with properly beyond the mainstream when they want to talk about ether. So, because by geometrical ether, you would mean space-time. Space-time itself seems to act as a type of ether, but it's not the same type of thing as a dynamical ether, which was around before 1905. So you've changed the ether concept. And so I queried this, and A.A. pointed out in the early stages of special relativity, it was getting conflated with Lorentz theory. So it was getting confused with what Lorentz was talking about. Einstein was saying things, and Lorentz was saying things, and you've had these two theories, and they were dealing with ether, and the two theories were getting confused together. And that was about 1905 onwards until about 1920 or something like that. So these two different theories were getting mixed up together. So the whole ether issue becomes a mess. So next one is time. Newtonian and Lorentzian background. You've got absolute universal time in that background. Those of Newtonian physics and Lorentz ether theory. You've got absolute time, but Einstein 1905 defined time operationally by synchronized clocks, and simultaneity becomes relative. In effect, the concept of time changed from an independent variable to a coordinate parameter tied to the observer's frame. And so the concept of time has been totally messed up. You've got what time was before 1905, and Einstein comes along, and then he messes up the whole concept in 1905. So I've read Einstein's special relativity paper in 1905, and it's a mess on not making things clear about the time concept. You read it, and it's sort of like what the WFT, what the FT is going on, what the I can't use that word properly, but you're kind of like, it's foobarred. The whole idea of time's messed up by Einstein's paper. It's not making it clear what he's doing. And so the next thing that gets messed up is length. You've got length contraction. So in the Lorentz theory, it's a physical contraction caused by motion through the ether. So you've got the ether again. This is the Lorentz theory. You've got ether and you've got length contraction in it. But in Einstein 1905, it's a kinematic contraction, and no object actually changes. It's a coordinate effect. And I can't get anywhere when I talk to people who believe in relativity about this. And it's sort of like a total mess. Some people will think it's a physical contraction instead of a coordinate effect. So people who believe in Einstein's relativity, they're totally messed up as to what they're actually believing. Some are really believing Lorentz theory when they're making claims about special relativity, and they're not really dealing with what Einstein really dealt with as special relativity. And the effect is the same equation, that's in both theories, different ontology, that's where they got the nature of space and time and everything else. It's a different one. It's different between the two theories about that. and it's sort of like it's a real deformation versus a perspective change. So in Lorentz theory, you've got a real length contraction is really contracting, but in the other theory you've got is just perception. It looks like it's contracting, but it's not really contracting. It's just a sort of like almost like an optical effect. It's an illusion of contracting as opposed to a real physical contracting. So the whole thing is messed up. And so it's another confusing mess in relativity. Is it a really physical length contraction or just the appearance of a length contraction, question mark? So it's totally messed up. Next is about simultaneity and synchronization, and that's synchronization of clocks. And so in the classical way before Einstein, it was simultaneity was objective and global. It was same everywhere for people. And so Einstein came along later and he defined it via light signal synchronization. So you've got to synchronize your clocks using a light signal and within a frame, and it was convention dependent. And so the effect was what was an objective temporal order became frame relative by definition. So it was you had an absolute simultaneity before Einstein, and when he came along, he made it all relative. So each observer is observing things differently. According to him, it's all relative to the observer about simultaneity. Different observers observe things in different sequences of order, sequence of order of events. It's all total messed up again. So next is energy and momentum. And so before Einstein, pre-relativity, and there was both these ideas as separate conserved quantities. When Einstein came along, relativity, and it got combined into a full vector, and that's a way of talking about things. You suddenly having a vector which is four-dimensional, and so the whole thing of energy and momentum became one mathematical entity. And then you got this conservation laws rewritten in geometrical form, so it suddenly all becomes geometry. And the effect is it's physical bookkeeping. It stayed the same numerically, but energy and momentum became components of a tensor. That's another way of talking about these vectors and so forth. You got vectors, matrices and things, and it's sort of like the mathematical entity is in the most abstract form is usually called tensor, and it's not distinct substances. And so it's a total mess. You were talking about energy and momentum before Einstein, and then he comes along and totally messes that up and changes it. So pause for cut of tea. See you there. Next slide. So the next thing he messes up is gravity. So with Newton, you've got gravity is a force acting across space. You've got an object acting on another object via gravity across empty space, or well, partially empty space. When we're looking to outer space now, we realize it's not totally empty. And so when Einstein comes along, he replaces that as curvature of space-time. It's suddenly becoming geometry again. And its free fall is inertial motion in curved geometry. And the effect is that force is eliminated and geometry substitute for physical interactions. Ideally, in the context of special relativity, if extend, as in my view, if extending it to deal with force, then should be dealt with the same way as Newtonian physics. But general relativity changes that. So special relativity is dealing with things in a context where you could probably deal with force of gravity in the same way as Newton, because you're not dealing with curved space-time, but suddenly he abandons that. It goes to general relativity and it becomes curved space-time. So it's total mess there, where you jump from special relativity way of dealing with things to dealing with it in general relativity. Next thing messed up is inertia, and its classical sense is a property of matter resisting acceleration. And in relativity, especially general relativity, is a manifestation of space-time structure. So once again, you're messing things up by becoming geometry. and it's locally indistinguishable from gravity. And the effect is inertia ceases to be a property of matter and becomes relational to geometry. So once again, you're messing things up by making it all about geometry. So my point again on this is the changes from special relativity to general relativity makes things confusing, because in this context of special relativity, you're not dealing so much with this geometry thing. You could think of forces as still probably in the context of Newton, and it's only with general relativity where you start thinking about geometry, where the space-time curves. In special relativity, space-time is not supposed to curve. So Einstein's totally messing things up by jumping from special relativity to general relativity in this sense. I need more cups of tea to get my voice back. That's good. Hopefully my voice won't go again. I can keep my voice going. So the next thing being messed up is the reference frame in motion. In the classical sense, before Einstein, motion measured against absolute space or ether. So in the sense, absolute space can be thought as a type of ether. But when Einstein comes along, relativity or uniform motion equivalent, no privileged frame. So in effect, there's the concept of state of motion lost absolute meaning, replaced by relative coordinate relations. So the changes, you're changing from thinking about absolute motion to thinking about relative motion, and relative motion to one observer is different to relative motion to another observer, and you're not thinking about motion as relative to an absolute frame. And so it's messing things up again. It's a naughty old Einstein changes everything. So next thing being messed up is cause and explanation. So if you're still dealing with Newton, and Lorentz was trying to work from Newton to as much as possible, you got physical mechanisms such as fields, forces, ether, and interactions. And Einstein framework, you got formal symmetry, principles, and geometry. He's messing it all up again by making it all about geometry and so forth. The mechanisms were replaced by invariance postulates. So making all these changes. And the effect is the shift from dynamical explanation to geometrical description. So you've got this change again to geometry. So this, I was trying to tidy this up before coming on, but I didn't have enough time. And it summarizes what is happening. So it's a bit messed up. I ran out of time trying to tidy this bit up. So it's the concept is you got mass. It was earlier meaning was variable with speed, and then it was redefined as invariant rest mass. And so you got the change from being dynamical to geometric. That's for the mass. And for the ether, you've got the earlier meaning was it was a physical medium, and that got redefined as the no ether, no physical medium ether, but you've got geometrical structure, which can be thought is a sort of type of geometrical ether. And so the change is ontological, where you've got the change in the nature of things. And the next concept messed up is time. It used to be earlier meaning was universal, and then it became frame dependent coordinate. And that the shift was between being absolute to relational. Next being messed up is length. You got physical. The earlier meaning was physical contraction, and that got replaced by coordinate effect. So the shift is the change from dynamical to kinematic. And so with simultaneity, the concept that earlier meaning was objective, and that got redefined as conventional. And so you got the nature of the thing being changed. the ontological thing. On gravity, it was a force originally, and that became changed to curvature, that curvature geometry, and so the change was between from being mechanistic to becoming geometrical. And so it goes on. Inertial originally was earlier meaning as a property of matter, and then it became a manifestation of the geometry of space time and all that. So the nature of things got changed completely, the ontological, and then it's the reference frame, and that got changed from being absolute to being relative, and that was a foundational change. And below here is about causality, that gets messed up as well, but you can't see it. It's another thing being messed up, causality. So all these things, if you're talking about things from the earlier meaning, it's got redefined. It's all been goalpost moved. So you're going from Newtonian physics, stroke Lorentz theory, and you want to go to Einstein, and you've got to make all these goalpost moves, which is changing everything from what it was originally to being something different. So back to AI, it's going to tell you what the net effect is. Each redefinition kept empirical formulas intact, but changed what those formulas were about. So you had to a large extent the same mathematics, but now what the mathematics meant was being changed. And so collectively, that these are the goalpost moves within relativity. It was from me changing from a mechanical realism to a geometrical formalism. And so you're changing from causes to symmetries, and you change from dynamics in a medium to relations in space-time. They preserved predictive power, yet transforms the theory's ontology. That's the nature of things. So the way is what those things mean in those mathematical equations suddenly gets changed. And so, in a sense, the mathematics of Einstein's relativity is very similar to the mathematics of Newton's physics, but there are a few differences in it. But you've got terms in it like m representing mass, and you've got terms like v representing velocity. So you've got those terms in those equations, and suddenly what is that supposed to mean for in the Newtonian context is suddenly supposed to be different in the Einstein's context. So he's messing up what those mathematical things are supposed to mean. And so AI carries on. Whether that transformation, which is transformation from Newton to Einstein, counts as a fate or depends on one's philosophy of science. So if you got the correct philosophy of science, the change from Newton to Einstein is a fatal goalpost move, and so you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't change from Newton to Einstein. Einstein's just going to talk about things differently, and that's a fatal goalpost move. You just shouldn't do it. You should stay with Newton. And so, but you can't rely on people. People have different philosophies, and so from the philosophy of the instrumentalists, they see it as progress. They don't see it as a fatal goalpost move. They see it as progress, and it's a progress in abstraction. While the realists see it as a breach of conceptual continuity, a loss of physical meaning. So you've got the split here between the two branches of philosophy, represented here as the instrumentalist and the realist. And so the realist, from a realist philosophy, the change, you shouldn't make the change from Newton to Einstein in the way you're talking about things. But in the instrumentalist philosophy, oh yeah, we can make the change. It's progress to make the change. But I would go by a realist. You shouldn't make the change. It's just making a mess of things. You're making a change, and it's just making a mess of things. You were talking about things in a certain way from Newton, and then suddenly you want to talk about it a completely different way. Next, all right. So I'm looking at next. I wanted to look at how mainstream has tried to fix the problems. because you've got all these goalpost moves from Newton to Einstein. And ChatGPT said some parts of mainstream physics have made progress in that direction, but not uniformly and rarely under the heading of fixing goalpost moves. They don't talk about it as the mainstream doesn't talk about things as fixing goalpost moves. They see it as progress. Well, really, they should be talking about it as goalpost moves making all these changes, but they don't want to see it that way. And AI says, here's a realistic picture of what has and has not been done. And so what mainstream physics has done is the historical scholarship and philosophy of physics. The historians and philosophers of science, for example, John Satchel and so forth, Don Howe and others, have documented how Einstein and Lorentz's concepts evolved and how terms were redefined. So they're looking at it still as progress. So Einstein has concepts, and those concepts were different to what Lorentz is talking about. So they're seeing it as evolved. So they're not evolved really in the sense of they've changed it. It's been changed, and so terms were redefined. So that suddenly Lorentz is defining terms in a certain way. Einstein and those who come after him have redefined them as something else. These studies are recognized within philosophy of physics departments and some physics education research groups. So some people recognize that's what's going on. Next, acknowledgement in advanced textbooks. And a few graduate level, that's beyond undergraduate. What they teach you at undergraduate level is not the same as what you get told about when you've graduated in master's degree and PhDs and so forth. You're going on beyond what you've been taught as an ordinary level bachelor's degree. So they're supposed to get more complicated, and so they're going to start talking about things in more detail. So it's really just a dumbed down thing that they teach you in the bachelor's level of science and the master's course and the PhDs and other sort of things that they want to give you more details. So a graduate level text, and there's such things as Gravitation by Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler, and so forth, explicitly state that relativistic mass is a historical artifact and explain why the invariant formulation replaced it. So in those say advanced texts, which are not dealt with at undergraduate level texts, they're say explaining why they changed it. And they usually note that early relativity used different terminology. I say those advanced level texts are pointing out that they've changed the way they're talking about things from earlier times, and that the modern form is a convention and not a new experiment. So the new way of talking about things is not the result of the experiment, as I'm noting here. Hello. Hopefully, I'm back now. Computer just chucked me out. I'm having problems here. So I'm just trying to get back to where I was. Hopefully I can continue. Having problems with the computer. Oh dear, naughty computer. So here I'm back. I think I'm back to the right place. Sorry for the interruption, pesty computer. All right. So they're making change to terminology, and they're not doing it from anything from an experiment. They're just, it's just a mess, basically, in my view. Next, AI points out is ongoing philosophical debate. So they have conferences and journals such as the Studies in History and Philosophy of Modern Physics, the Foundation of Physics, and Philosophy of Science regularly publish papers debating the ontology of realism and the interpretation of space-time, simultaneity and mass. And it's places like that where they start changing the way they're talking about things. So they're having these conferences, writing these philosophy papers and so forth, and they're changing the way they're talking about Einstein's relativity. They're little pests. And say you haven't got a rigid, closed way of talking about Einstein's relativity. It's something which they're going to just keep amending. Next is you got the circular transparency to some extent. Some university courses include historical sections or optional reading about how definitions change, though usually only briefly. So really what's being pointed out here is they're not really making it clear to most physics students at undergraduate level that things keep changing. They're not talking about the history. They're not doing about the history of how things have changed in the way you talk about things in the relativity context. They're not, i.e., they're not talking about the goalpost changes. I call it goalpost changes. They're not telling you about that when they're teaching you relativity. Next. And so AI then wants to tell me what mainstream physics has not done. So there's no official acknowledgement of conceptual rupture. Mainstream physics has not formally declared that these redefinitions constitute a change in the theory itself. So they're not telling you that. So they're trying to make these changes and sweep it under the carpet that they're making these changes. They're trying to ignore it, nor mention that they're making the changes. In standard pedagogy, the shift is described as refinement, not as a discontinuity or goalpost move. So they're not acknowledging what they're doing as goalpost moving. They're just calling it a refinement and so forth, or progress and so forth. And they're just making a mess of things and carrying on. Next is the limited integration of philosophy in physics education. Most physics degrees, that's the undergraduate bachelor level, require little or no philosophy as science, so students often learn the modern formalism without awareness of how meanings evolved. So that's another mess. So they're not making students aware of the philosophy that's been going on in the changing meaning of terms. They're just dumbing everything down to the students. They're covering up things. So next thing AI points out is little constitutional encouragement of alternative interpretations. So the Lorentzian or ether-based reinterpretations are rarely funded or discussed in mainstream journals, except historically. The focus remains on the geometrical framework, not on parallel realist reconstructions. So the institutions of physics are biased towards keeping it the way that Einstein has formulated things based on geometry and so forth. And they don't want to fund alternative points of view. Next is the minimal discussion of conceptual integrity, and the physics culture still prioritize predictive power and mathematical coherence over ontological consistency. So they're not interested in tidying up this philosophical mess they're making. They're just interested in playing around with their mathematics. The idea that silent redefinitions threaten conceptual honesty is more a philosophical concern than a mainstream one. Mainstream doesn't care. Mainstream physics, that is, the mainstream physics community doesn't really care about the philosophical mess they're making. So AI points out the bottom line, historically and philosophically, the shifts are well documented. Yeah, but you got to go and dig through them. You got to go through all the conference papers and so forth, which they have in the philosophy departments. And so pedagogically and institutionally, the mainstream largely treats them as resolved refinements, not as breaches of conceptual integrity. So they're just deceiving themselves here. The mainstream's just deceiving themselves. They think they've resolved things with refinement. They just keep changing things ever in the past, and they still seem to be wanting to keep changing things in the future, which they're going to call refinements. So some groundwork exists, but a full reckoning, the kind you're calling for, which is me, is pointing out my point of view, has not been undertaken. So the mainstream has not undertaken my point of view of tidying up the mess they've made. So my question then is this then a failure of the mainstream, question mark? And AI points out to me, from a conceptual and philosophical standpoint, yes. I'm right again. I like this AI. It agrees with me. It's looking at things from my point of, as I point out, it looks at things from my point of view, and from my point of view, I am right. Yes. The trouble is that there are other points of view, and the other points of view wouldn't want to see it that way. So carrying on, it legitimately be seen as a failure of the mainstream. And here's why. So we've got an argument as to why the mainstream is failing, given to me by AI. And it's the number one is failure to maintain conceptual integrity. In Relativity underwent multiple goalpost moves. That's my terminology, and that's the way I look at it. They're making goalpost moves, but the mainstream is looking at its progress. And so mass was redefinition, ether abandonment, space-time geometry replacing forces, simultaneity becoming relative, etc., etc., etc. All those goalposts moving. These moves preserve predictive accuracy, but change the ontology and meaning of core concepts without explicit acknowledgement. The next is the conceptual continuity. A key part of scientific rigor was violated. From that perspective, it's a failure of intellectual honesty and rigor. So it's from my point of view, they're not being honest. The mainstream is just being dishonest, and it's pointing at AI is pointing out my point of view. They're not maintaining scientific rigor when they're making this mess. Next is the failure to educate clearly. Most textbooks and courses present modern relativity as a seamless development from 1905, rarely noting the discontinuities. So they're not, when they teach it to you, it's all being dumbed down. They're not pointing out that what Einstein says is not necessarily the same as what they're going to teach you. Students often finish their education without awareness that the definitions of mass, time, and length change, which perpetuates misunderstanding. So they've dumbed education down so much when they're teaching relativity that students are coming away with misunderstandings about relativity. Next is a failure to encourage alternative interpretations. And so the realist reconstructions, which would be based on Lorentzian ether-based or alternative space-time formulations, are largely ignored or marginalized in mainstream journals and funding. I.e., if they don't fund it, then it's not going to get done by the mainstream. Mainstreams researchers. So the way mainstream physics is set up, they're just not funding alternatives to relativity for the Lorentzian point of view, or the classical point of view based on an ether. They're not funding it, so those things are not getting published. So without funding those things, you're not getting those papers being written. And this prevents critical engagement with conceptual foundations, reinforcing the narrative that the Einsteinian geometrical interpretation is the only valid framework. So it's a circular thinking here, where they're not going to fund the alternative to Einstein of being the Lorentzian point of view, based upon Newtonian type of view. They're not going to fund it, so there's no papers being written on that because it's not funded. And then they think, oh, well, this only point of view is the Einsteinian interpretation which we're going by. So it's only just circular. They're not funding an alternative point of view. So that it's they're then deluding themselves that that's the only point of view. Next is the counterpoint, predictive success. On the other hand, from a purely instrumentalist or practical viewpoint, the mainstream has not failed. And so they're ignoring the philosophical mess they're making and thinking they're being successful. Relativity works extraordinarily well and underlies GPS. Well, that's arguable. We had Ron Hatch, who was a GPS engineer, and he's explained to us that relativity doesn't really work with that. And I presume in that context he means the philosophy of relativity doesn't really work. Next is you've got particle physics and cosmology. So all those things. You've got a cosmology crisis at the moment, where you got missing mass. You got which is called dark matter and dark energy and so forth. And so you've got most of the universe is mysterious. It doesn't. There's more universe out there than what we've been able to observe. And so the failure is philosophical, not empirical, and that's what the AI is concluding. I think, well, the failure is both philosophical and empirical, because the philosophy is stunting your ability to do the empirical bit of it. You've rigidly stuck into the philosophy of Einstein's geometry and so forth, and you're not funding alternatives to that. So you are stunting empirical investigations. Anyway, this is what AI concludes. It's empirically is no failure. So basically, they've been able to bodge things where they can fit Einstein's relativity to experiments and think to themselves that they've proven it. But conceptually and philosophically, yes, the mainstream failed to maintain transparency, conceptual integrity, and openness to alternative realist interpretations. So the philosophy has been a total mess. In other words, mainstream preserved formulas but sacrificed the clarity of what those formulas actually mean, which is exactly what a fatal goalpost move does. So there we are. It's a fatal goalpost move. Philosophically, they have made a fatal goalpost move. Their philosophy is so messed up that it is fatal. It's a fatal change they've made. And that's what AI is saying. Unfortunately, it's looking at it from my point of view. And my point of view is they're moving goalposts. And the goalposts have been moved so much that it's fatal. They're fatal goalpost moves. But the mainstream doesn't look at it that way. They are thinking of it as progress, making these goalpost moves, which they're going to call refinements and so forth. So it's a conflict between their point of view and my point of view. My point of view, they're moving goalposts, and those goalposts are fatal. But they're ignoring that. They're ignoring the mess they're making in philosophy. So Einstein's relativity is just a failed theory, and by theories I mean special and general relativity, if you treat them as two different theories, they're failures. If you try to talk about it, it's a mess of confusions. It's philosophically a mess. They keep changing the terminology, and that has made a total mess of things. Hence the fatal goalpost moves. So that's it, finished. Thank you. So let's see if any comments are turned up. Thank you. I'll reduce my size of my screen. Escape. All right. Hopefully my computer will not play me up again. Okay, so finish. The mainstream has the failure. The mainstream has failed in its physics, but it doesn't accept that and is under the delusion that they're being successful. All right, then, let's have a look at the comments. I haven't got anybody in what we call the green room where we have people come on and they can talk to me. And I think that's a problem because of this talk has been sort of the last minute thing which has turned up and normally gets an announcement earlier on in the week. So morning, first comment here. Morning, Roger. Morning, Shockwave. Next comment. Good day, everyone. Yeah, good day. Oh, yeah, great. Somebody hears me. Yeah, we hear you fine, Roger. And that, what time? I don't know what the time of that was. So about 3 o'clock. Yeah, so trouble is I sometimes click my microphone off, so I don't have guarantee that I'm always on air. But it started off seems to be all right. I don't know what's this. Well, I don't know what 5 times 5 means in that context. So yeah. Yeah, let's see, what's this one? Trying to click on this one? Comment, all right, comment, and so, yeah, so this person's pointing out, were the goalposts of relativity, and that's the goalpost moves, in a correct place in the beginning, since he neglects the possibility of C plus V, where V is the velocity of the source. If you read Einstein's paper 1905, the first one on special relativity, it's a total mess. He seems to start with mathematics where you can add light speed c with a velocity v and come up with a speed greater than c. But then later on, he seems to have changed that definition, and it's sort of like it becomes no, you don't have a speed greater than c. But he seems to start off with mathematics where you can have c plus v as being greater than c if v is greater than 0, of course. So the mathematics is a total mess from the very beginning, and that's goalpost moving. In the first paper he seems to move the goalposts on adding velocities, and he doesn't explain himself properly. But that's sort of like another talk. As I pointed out at the beginning of this talk, there's numerous problems in Einstein's relativity. Let's go back to the paper. This is the paper, Einstein's first paper on special relativity, and it's a total mess. It creates numerous problems, and it issues problems with what he's talking about. It's all like you've got to try to impose on it some sort of meaning, and he seems to add velocities in the normal way, then later on wants to add them in a different way. And why does he do that? Doesn't make sense. Like, yeah. Yeah. So this is interesting. This is interesting, but not relevant to my talk. There's this object which has come from another star system. I don't know if it's a comet or asteroid or whatever, but some people start to think it's might be an alien spaceship, and it's called 3I Atlas. And I found out the I means for interstellar, so it's an interstellar object. Interstellar meaning coming from a different star system. So it's the third one we've been aware of. And so if it's aliens, it could be could be a massive asteroid. Yeah, massive asteroid, and the aliens could have drilled down into it and they build a base up inside it. So it could be an artificial, could be an asteroid with aliens in it, or it could be a massive spaceship. It could be anything. And at the moment, we don't know. We don't know what's going on. You've got a lot of conspiracy theories and speculations as to what's going on with it. But at the moment, it's coming in. It's coming into our solar system, and eventually, it should be leaving our solar system, I think. And whether we're going to be invaded by aliens, who knows? It's something we'll find out about within the next few months. So there we go. Somebody else is talking about it. It's don't know what that 60K stroke S Atlas is or was 60 times. Don't know what that is, but Horton Arp is often considered as a modern day Galileo. He was an astronomer and he was making astronomical observations, and the mainstream didn't really want to address what he was observing properly, and that would be a very interesting, different talk to go on about Horton Arp and what he found out. So I think it's still more stuff about the Atlas thing, but it's a diversion. It's not what I've been talking about. So Professor Harlem says, for any other theory, if something does not work or seems irrational, the theory is questioned. But that is not what is happening for the theory of relativity. Yep, exactly. It's a total mystery. Relativity seemed to be accepted without question by a lot of people. Einstein became famous in 1919 with his with Eddington's astronomical observation. And so suddenly, Einstein's a genius, and that's what the newspapers latched on to. Einstein is a genius, and his theory's been confirmed by Eddington. But when you start digging into it, no, it hasn't been. Eddington didn't confirm Einstein's theory. There was lots of other theories out there besides Einstein's theory, and that was never seriously debated. The scientific community just seemed to go along with what the newspapers were saying. The publicity for Einstein being a genius, they just seemed to go along with that, and the counterpoint of view was not brought out so much in the news media. The news media seemed to just dominate with Einstein being a genius, and there was no proper scientific debate on the subject, as far as I can see. They just ignore criticisms of Einstein's relativity. So only in the framework of the theory of relativity ask people to not believe in common sense, but to follow Einstein's nonsense. That's one of the things they say, that nature does not have to follow common sense. People believe in Einstein's relativity. When you point out to them what they're saying doesn't make sense, their comeback is nature does not have to make sense. So what Einstein's relativity can look like is nonsense, but they're saying, well, it might look like nonsense, but it is still true. And so that's their twist around they do in the words. It's just saying a theory is nonsense does not seem to be a way of proving to these people who want to believe in what we can call nonsense. It doesn't seem to dissuade them. They just want to carry on believing it regardless of whether it looks like nonsense or not. So, yeah. So, time function of velocity is such a ridiculous concept, one may wonder why it is still considered serious by the mainstream. So it's the velocity has been messed up when you talk about velocity in the classical stroke Newtonian way. Then it gets changed into something else, which doesn't make sense in Einstein's relativity. So it's just messed up. So I don't know this one, and so I don't know the bit that Jim was referring to, but it's supposed to be a bit earlier, and the absurdity builds on that all the way to serious proposals that the universe is in a black hole. Yeah, so if you can look at Einstein's relativity as being nonsense, you can look at absurd, but it just keeps being built upon. So you're just building one absurdity on top of another absurdity. So Robert's saying without Minkowski, you will not connect Lorentz and Einstein. So what happens is Einstein, a paper on special relativity shown here, 1905, and he's not talking about space time, but Minkowski brings that in later, 1908, and so the space time concept of Minkowski then gets added to Einstein's special relativity, even though it's not in the original. So it is a bit of a goalpost move to a certain extent. But how does that then connect to Lorentz? And I've not gone into that. So Professor Harlem says, and now I presume the mainstream, they say time does not exist, and that's still another thing that some of the people who believe in relativity say, that time does not really exist. So that they've messed up time. The concept of time is messed up. They feel that there's a problem with Einstein theory, but instead of abandoning it, they say time does not exist. Yeah, so that's another add-on. So some people they prefer, they like to believe in Einstein's relativity, special and general. They like to believe in it, but they do see a problem with it, and they then come up with their add-ons. And one of their add-ons is they like to think that time does not exist. So that it's just another add-on goalpost move, and it's messing up things even more. So I don't know. I should add this one up. So this person is coming up with something like 16 times 90 equals 1,440 at the minutes of a day. So as a comment on that, he's putting things in the comments which I don't know what he's talking about. So I'm just passing on that. It doesn't seem to be in relation to my talk. He's talking about something else, I think. So Robert says, Newton started with Galilean relativity, then moved into gravity. Why can't Einstein start with special relativity and move into gravity as well? So there's a lot of things to deal with here. Newton's physics is supposed to be based upon Galilean relativity, and Galilean relativity is supposed to be the Galilean transformations. But if you look to Galileo never said anything which like the Galilean transformations. The transformations that came up first were the transformations for special relativity, and there were people before Einstein using those transformations, persons like Voigt and so forth. And Lorentz came along, and he was using those transformations, and for some reason those transformations became called Lorentz transformations, and that's the transformations of special relativity. But that was 1905. But there's no mention of Galilean transformations before 1905. It was after 1905 that the Galilean transformations were invented. And the reason why they were invented was to contrast the difference between Newton's physics of Galilean relativity and Einstein's special relativity. So I think those equations are false. They're not really part of Galilean relativity, but that's what the mainstream says they are. But really, they're not. They didn't come into existence until after 1905. After special relativity was created, they came up with what is now called Galilean relativity. So they messed things up. Historically, things are messed up. It's just a mess. And next thing they do is, well, Einstein's special relativity. Well, if you go with that, you've now talked about in terms of flat space-time, where you've got no curvature of space-time. So why not put forces in that context from Newton? And that's a possibility. But no, Einstein did not take that route. He seemed to come up with the idea of curving space-time. And so that's why we go from special relativity to general relativity. Special relativity, yeah, maybe you could do with Newtonian forces. And why do you suddenly jump from that to saying it's curved space-time? That doesn't make any sense. You look to the writings of Einstein, and it doesn't make it clear what's going on there. It's just another total mess. Trying to move down. So where do you go? Next one. Yeah. That. Oh God. Come on. Next comment. Professor Harlem says space-time is simply Voigt's auxiliary variables 1887. That was Voigt was dealing with the transformations that later became called Lorentz transformations. These variables come from a substitution in the wave equation. They have no physical meaning. Space-time is wrong, useless, and misleading. Well, I don't really go back that far in looking at those things. I start with Einstein and think, well, it's a total mess. Einstein brings up things and it's a total mess. Next. Yeah. Professor Harlem says there's no relativity in Galileo's work. Well, what we call Galilean relativity with the Galilean transformations, that's not in Galileo's work. That's not there. But Galileo, I think, did talk about a relativity where you consider what was the ship. You're comparing observing things in the cabin of a ship when it's moving and when it's not moving. So he did bring a sort of like relativity in a bit. But what we call in Galilean relativity is not what he was talking about. That was something that was invented after special relativity. So that's a total mess. So Robert says, you have two observers without invariance. How do you agree? So, well, that's what the relativity principle is about. You're supposed to, if you got two observers, you are wondering what the invariance is between them. They're making observations, and what do they agree about? So Jim says Galilean relativity is simple common sense. But to a large extent, that is what it is. If you mean Newtonian physics. Now, Professor Holm says the concept of Galilean relativity is an invention in the framework of Einstein's theory. So it's Einstein's theory of relativity, special and general, and then suddenly after that they invented Galilean relativity, or what we call Galilean relativity. It was invented after Einstein's relativity. So that's a total. So the way they talk about it as being Galilean relativity, it makes it sound like this is what relativity was before Einstein, but it wasn't. it wasn't that's not historically what happened. It's the other way around. It was Einstein's special and general relativity. Then it was Galilean relativity, but because they named it Galilean relativity, they made it sound like Galilean relativity came first, but it's not. And that's what and I'm talking about in the context of Galilean transformations. They've just named all that sort of stuff Galilean relativity, and sort of like, well, it's not the same thing as what was before Einstein. So historically, they made a mess of things. So Hot Professor Holland says Galileo is working on inertial, not relativity. So I think inertia is tied a bit into the relativity idea. I don't think it was fully formed back then, though. Right. So Professor Harlem says the invariance idea is a misconception. So, but it is what the relativity principle is about. You're wondering what the invariance is between things. So whether it's a misconception or not is what has been imposed upon modern physics. Oh, so Fractal says, what is the difference between dynamical and kinematic? Yeah, so in the context I was talking about, there was difference between there was an actual physical effect going on due to forces, and which was causing the length contraction, and the other thing was kinematic, where there was no forces, and what you were just observing for the length contraction was just an observation. It's just well, I don't in appearance of a contraction when there wasn't a contraction, but that's another big issue to argue about philosophically. When they talk about length contraction, are they talking about it as a real physical effect, or is it just a appearance effect? I don't know. So Voigt made this is for his mathematics which became later called Lorentz transformations, made the wave equation to have the same form as a wave equation with the observer at rest. Einstein interpreted that as an invariance of the law of nature, and you say that's nonsense. Well, it's Einstein bringing in the relativity principle, and I think Einstein wasn't the first to bring in the relativity principle. It might have been Einstein, it might have been Poincaré who was the first person to talk of the term relativity principle. So it gets, but Einstein is the one messing all that up. And with the relativity principle, you are wondering about invariance. Anyway, Jim says the first mistake that led to all the rest was the first postulate that kinematic relativity applies to electromagnetism. So, to an extent, that is an assumption. The implicit and assumption being made is that you can apply relativity to the relativity principle to electromagnetism, and that's why Einstein was making that statement of the relativity principle. He wanted a relativity principle that can be applied to electromagnetism and be applied to Newton. He wanted classical physics, and which was Newton, but he was modifying then Newtonian physics to fit in. So that is a starting assumption from what Einstein is going by, the relativity principle, and then he wants to change everything else to fit in with that. So if you're saying it's a mistake, well, from Einstein's point of view, it wasn't a mistake. It's just something you start from, but it's created a whole mess. And so this paper from Einstein is 1905. That's where he starts making that mess. Right. So next one, Professor Harlem says the areas to say that Lorentz transformations represent physical phenomena. So that's a difference in the philosophical philosophical interpretation. And I think I dealt with that what Lorentz is saying is different to what Einstein relativity was coming up with. So, next one. So, Robert is querying this bit about Galileo, and he's suggesting reading Galileo's Tale of Two Cities. I think Tale of Two Cities, that was that Tale of Two Cities, that was Charles Dickens. So you might be talking about Galileo's book, which is the dialogue on two systems of physics or something. I forget what the name of Galileo's book is. Galileo. Let's have a look. I'm looking it up, but so yeah, so Galileo wrote several books, I think, and the book that might be referred to is the dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, and the world systems would be what we'd probably now call is physics. So let's talk about two different types of physics. So next, yeah, kinematics is a description of motion, dynamics is an explanation of motion, forces energy, causing it, yeah, something like that. So this person says, how can a particle in Earth's frame of reference travel farther than light can in a finite time difference? Modern physics says that particles' time slows down so it can go farther. This is fatal logic. Well, that's the sort of thing they say. And you can end up in arguing about that with them. Professor Harlem, you will not find anything called relativity or transformation in Galileo's work. If you talk about relative motion is very simple and it's different from Einstein's theory. Yeah. The thing to point out with Galileo, it was the Copernican revolution. And before the Copernican revolution, they were thinking in terms of the Earth as not moving. And so the sun was moving around the Earth. And with the Copernican revolution, it was you're treating that the Earth was moving around the sun. And that's not quite accurate. It was sort of like the sun and Earth move around a common center. But what you were talking about then was sort of like relative motion. And so the Copernican revolution was going on to this sort of idea that motion could be relative. And I think it was Leibniz who went into more details about that. Yeah. So Professor Harlem says time being a function of velocity is nonsense. And so I think it depends on how you write the equations. What you get with special relativity is a gamma factor, and so you can sort of play around with that and put it on to terms like velocity and that, and then suddenly say, "Oh, that's velocity." So it's just a method in the mathematics. So Professor Holland says collective consciousness is attracted by time being relative. I myself was fascinated by it, but this is wrong. This is not real physics. So I think what he means is many people like this idea of time being relative, and I think that's what he's meaning. And it is a very attractive idea. I mean, it attracted me a long time back because you think time is relative, and so time for me could be different for you out there. So if I get in my spaceship and I travel in my spaceship, and then I come back to Earth again and say, oh, only a couple of years have passed for me, but I get back to Earth and hundreds of years have passed on Earth. So time is different for me to you. So, well, that's a very attractive idea. And so it's sort of like in my spaceship, I've sort of like traveled into the future and come back. Oh, time travel. That's time travel into the future. And then when this uh, treating space time as geometry, oh, you could sort of like bend space and time. And so you could then bend it and you get into your spaceship. And if you go faster than say light speed of light, you could then travel back in time. So you could both travel uh, forward in time and backward in time. But that's all sort of like fantasy, really. But that's the sort of fantasy which comes out of Einstein's relativity, and it's been very interesting in science fiction films to have that, where you have time travel, such as the film Back to the Future. You get into your car, your DeLorean car, and you can travel backwards and forwards in time. And so, that's a very interesting science fiction idea, and people find that attractive. And so, say Einstein's relativity is dealing with that, but it's sort of like it's just when you look at Einstein's relativity, it's a mess. It's just a mess. So, if you're saying that's what's coming out from it, oh, it's been very productive to suddenly refer to Einstein's relativity in these fantasy films. And so it appeals to people on the fantasy level. So Kurt says the Galilean transformations, actually Newton's mathematically, were not named until after the Lorentz transformations. So I said it was an attempt to create Newton's work with a transform of some sort. So I don't think Newton didn't name them either. I don't think the Galilean transformations weren't named until after the Lorentz transformations have been named. So it's kind of like Einstein's come up with all this stuff in his 1905 paper and other papers after that and so forth. And then suddenly, how do we connect all this to Newton? And they came up with this invention of Galilean transformations, which has totally confused things, because you think with a name like Galileo that it should have been before Einstein. But no, it wasn't. It was after Einstein. The theory of Galilean transformations was after Einstein. It was not before him. Oh, so the way they name things totally messes up the way you think history is. Oh, I don't know. This bit of mathematics. He seems to be doing mathematics like that. I don't know what that's about. So Professor Harlem says the idea that Einstein changed the concept of space and time is totally wrong. Well, that's the way it's generally presented to you, because in the context of Newtonian physics, you've got absolute time in Einstein's relativity. Suddenly, you're emphasizing time as being relative. So that's the way it's usually presented. If you actually go back to Newton, he does talk about space and time as being absolute and relative, because he had to contend with Leibniz, what Leibniz was talking about, and so Newton was considering those two things. But generally now we just think of Newton as dealing with absolute space and time, and Einstein is dealing with relative space and time. So when Professor Harlem says saying it's totally wrong, it's generally thought that that's what Einstein meant. It's generally thought that Einstein meant that time and space were relative and not the same as what Newton was talking about. I don't know. So Kurt says, justify Lorentz. Newton is a relations. It transforms nothing. Lorentz appends space and time through a natural transformation. I don't fully follow that. You got Lorentz theory, which is the same mathematics as Einstein's special relativity, in the sense of being called the mathematics of the Lorentz transformations, but it just gets interpreted differently. Hey, Professor Harlem again. Although this is attractive, the first time we hear about it, but this is a misleading science. I think he's talking about the idea of the time being relative. It sounds attractive, but it's misleading. Yeah. Okay. And so Professor Holmes says, I agree with Kurt, it's actually Einstein who invented the idea of Galilean relativity and Galilean transformation. These are not. I think it was Einstein who came up with it. I think it was another physicist after Einstein. I think it was Frank. If I look it up, it was some other physicist who he was trying to make sense of what Einstein was talking about, who came up with this Galilean transformation. And I think then Einstein adopted it. So it's not due solely to Einstein. There were other people working on Einstein's relativity, not just Einstein. And I think the Galilean transformation came up with by somebody else. I think it was Frank or somebody. If I look it up. Oh, fuck. The Galilean transformation. No, no, it's not. It's not easily. It's not easily look upable on the internet. But I did read about it some time ago. It was another physicist, not Einstein himself. It's just Einstein who adopted that. I think it was Frank. I don't know. Next. Robert K says, if you have two observers facing each other, which one measures the negative distance? So you got A. If you got A and B, A says you're 10 meters away from me in my positive direction, and so from person's B frame, A would be minus 10 meters away from the other direction, 10 meters away. But it's sort of like the way you set up a reference frame. Okay. Professor Holland says, can you be more specific? The distance between the two observers is what you consider in your problem. I think that was just the problem I was dealing with from Robert. Did we lose Roger? Yeah, you did lose me for a while. The computer knocked me out. I'm having problems here. I've normally when I give a talk, I've had an hour's sleep before coming on, and that didn't happen today. It was sort of all the last minute thing setting up this talk today. It wasn't announced in time, so I've not had my kip to prepare me for this talk. So I'm suffering from not having my siesta, and the next thing I do is I normally check my slides come through properly, and I've not had time to do that today, so my slides have been a bit messed up. So it's all been very quick, and the announcement hasn't gone out until only, I think, an hour before this talk was set up, so I didn't really know to the last minute whether this talk was coming about or not. Just waiting there, seeing if it would turn up. So what's this next? And now, of course, my computer's playing me up, so these things are sent to try us. So Jim says, I agree, the Galilean relativity just expresses the Newtonian paradigm mathematically. Yeah, and that's supposed to be basically what it was. So Einstein came out with his relativity, special and general, and they tried to work out what Newtonian physics would be dealing with, and in relation to what Einstein was talking about. So this Newton paradigm was worked out after Einstein. Yep. Roger is back now. Yeah, post points late. I'm back. Yeah. So magic. You think about these computers, they sort of like magic. They're just too complicated now, aren't they? Really. Next. Professor Harlem says, I suggest to remove the term relativity from science and keep it as a historical curiosity. Well, it's not looking like anything like that is happening at the moment. It'd be a long time into the future if anything like that ever happened. At the moment in time, mainstream physics talks a lot about relativity. Next, you mean when and light signals is sent? Maybe a light signal is sent. That is totally nonsense. You're trying to explain physically Voigt's variables, which is the Lorentz transformation. So that's so. I think it's referring to this paper again. First paper on special relativity by Einstein, and Einstein setting up this strange thing with light signals and bouncing between mirrors, and having the clock set up for that, and that's clock synchronization. So say supposed to lead into this mathematics for Lorentz transformations, but what Einstein is doing is all just totally confusing. Has to try to make sense of it. Next, so Professor Harlem says the first part of Einstein's paper. Yeah, so Einstein's paper was he wrote it in sections, I think, on the electrodynamics of moving bodies. That's it. The special relativity paper here. It's based on a thought experiment to derive Voigt's auxiliary variables to Lorentz transformations. Time being a function of velocity is nonsense. I don't think Einstein talked about time being a function of velocity. It's Einstein being confusing. He's probably, that's an interpretation of what he's talking about. If you go by what Einstein's saying, it doesn't make any sense. And so then you're trying to impose an interpretation onto what Einstein's saying. And so the thought experiment, so you're talking about light bouncing, light being set up to set a clock up, I suppose, and you're thinking that is a thought experiment. That's not normally taught about as the thought experiment of Einstein. Normally, the thought experiment of Einstein is something like the Einstein sitting on a spaceship or something, looking into a mirror, and then wondering if he travels at the speed of light, whether he can see his face in the mirror. And that's the thought experiment normally thought about for special relativity. But of course, there's other thought experiments like the twin paradox can be thought of as a thought experiment, where you've got the idea of two twins, one station on Earth, one travels off in a spaceship, then comes back to Earth. And you start in a thought experiment, are they the same age? And another one you can think of a thought experiment of train going into a tunnel, and the tunnel's too short. Does the train actually fit in the tunnel completely at one time, or doesn't it? And it's supposed to be a length contraction going on with the train. And if the train travels at, say, the speed of light, thought experiment, if it travels really fast, can it fit into the tunnel with completely or not? Because it's then the length of it is shrunk. So if the tunnel is when the train and the tunnel is at rest, and you say, oh, the tunnel's too short for the train to fit into it. But if the train, so say, shrinks as it's going at the speed of light, would it then fit into the tunnel? And that's another thought experiment. So there's loads of thought experiments. But I don't in Einstein's paper here, that's one. He's not really making it clear about the thought experiments. It's sort of like he's saying lots of weird things, and he doesn't explicitly say, "Oh, this is a thought experiment." When I'm dealing with this light bounce back going one way and then coming back again, and I'm using that to set up a clock. He doesn't call that a thought experiment, but probably that is should be thought of in terms of a thought experiment. So Robert says, well, Newton was the first real scientist to rid physics of the philosophy. Many have carried on since. Probably, I don't really know what philosophy he's talking about. Wasn't it? I think his book was the Principia of Natural Philosophy. So Newton was still calling what he was talking about is philosophy. That's it. It was Principia. That's it. So Einstein's book, I think he called it the Philosophy Naturalis Principia Mathematical. So he was still calling it natural philosophy. So he didn't completely. So Newton's point of view, he was realizing he was dealing with a type of philosophy, and he was calling it natural philosophy. And what Newton called natural philosophy, we generally think of now as physics, but the physics that Newton was dealing with got messed up by this paper by Einstein. Suddenly, Einstein's changing things, and so it's totally messing up physics. Right. Next, Professor Harlem, write your hypothesis about two observers A and B. Consider B moving at speed v relative to A. It is very easy to express the position of B. No need for nonsensical transformation. I think the problem there is thought experiments. you could come up with an idea of what Newton's thought experiment would be for that, and you could come up with what Einstein might think is the thought experiment for that. And it's sort of like you then start with just. I would think it would just degenerate into arguing. So this person is still coming up with a lot of mathematics, which I don't understand. I don't know what he's talking about. He's put a lot of posts about that. And so Professor Harlem says, Voigt Trude probably tried to explain the Michelson-Morley experiment before the Michelson-Morley experiment. Start again. Voigt tried to explain the Michelson experiment before the Michelson-Morley experiment. I think what happened was it was Michelson who did the experiment first, then they redid the experiment, and it was then the Michelson-Morley experiment. He tried to explain it with a new formula for Doppler effect. Yeah, So that'd be a different talk to go into all of that. Michelson experiment of 1881, and later Michelson did the experiment with Morley later. We did the experiment. Yeah. What's he go? Robert says, Roger, AI got tired of telling you the truth and finally told you what you wanted to hear. The HERE probably means hear, HEAR, so that the AI could move on. No, I don't think. Not my experience of AI. It just likes to keep repeating the same things whenever possible. And I interrogated it. I've asked it questions such as, "You've told me this answer. Would you give that same answer to other people?" And AI says no. It would give a different answer to different people. So it then explains that it's going from my point of view on things. It's given the answer to me based on my point of view, and for other people, they've got a different point of view, and so it would answer in the context of that other person's point of view. So in my context here, I'm going by the point of view that all the changes made to Einstein's relativity over the years from 1905 onwards, that is goalpost moves. And so it talked to me about things from that point of view, and it tells me that that's fatal. The goalpost moves that have been made are fatal. It's made a complete mess of things. But it says it's not the way that the mainstream thinks about things. The mainstream point of view is its refinement of Einstein's relativity. So you've got Einstein's relativity in this crude form from 1905, and the mainstream thinks they're making progress by refining it, making it more, making it better, because Einstein's come up with these concepts, and these concepts don't actually work, and so you've got to refine these concepts. So this paper makes a total mess of things, and you've got to refine it. You've got to try to explain things better than the way Einstein talked about it. And I'm calling that goalpost moving, and AI looks at it from that point of view, but it also points out that that's not the mainstream point of view. The mainstream point of view is thinking they're making progress. But so from my point of view, the mainstream is just totally messing things up. And AI would agree with me. Based on my point of view, AI agrees that the mainstream is totally making a mess of things. But that's not what they want to believe. Yeah. So Robert points out he made a typo error with the word here. So, okay, good. Okay. So hopefully that's explained things to you, that when you deal with AI, you've got to be careful. You've got to say from what point of view are you answering that question, because it will give you a different answer based on different points of view. But my point of view is correct. It's the correct way of looking at things. If you want to look at Einstein's relativity, what they're doing is making a lot of changes, and those changes are really goalpost move, and that means it's a total mess. Even though mainstream doesn't want to see it that way. Professor Harlem says his explanation was not correct, and that might be Einstein. So he's disagreeing there with Einstein. But the problem is that he used a change of variables that has been adopted by Lorentz and it reinterpreted wrongly by Einstein. So I am not sure about when he says his explanation not correct, who's referring to in that bit. But basically, you've got Lorentz theory, and then you've got the mathematics of that, and it gets interpreted differently by Einstein. And a problem with that is with this paper here, he's not making it, Einstein's not making it clear that he's going by Lorentz theory and reinterpreting things. He's not, Einstein's not just making a total mess of things. This is a mess. So Lorentz came up with his theory first, but Einstein is not making it clear what's going on with this paper. So James says, not just philosophy, but the history of science is missing. It probably means messed up. They forgot the reason for relativity in the first place. Well, the reason for relativity especially comes from Galileo. So Roger Robert says your number 3 leaves out Minkowski. I can't deal with everything. Does it mean slide 3 about Minkowski? I can talk about Minkowski, but that would be a different topic on point about Einstein's relativity. It's gone under a lot of changes, and one of those changes was they've added space-time to it from how Minkowski was dealing with it. It's another one of those goalpost moves. So he's back up again. So this person is doing a lot of strange mathematics. I don't know what's going on. Robert K. This person talks to Robert K. I thought the instantaneous distance between two objects is measurable. How is that relative? I think in the case of Einstein's relativity, you can't do that. You can't make an instantaneous observation. You've got to take into account that the speed of light is finite. So that messes up your observations. So Jim says dark matter is real, it is the ether. So that's one possible explanation. People have talked a lot about dark matter and dark energy and so forth. That'd be another talk. So Jim says special relativity cannot account for GPS SANAC corrections, and that would be something more with the GPS engineer Ron Hatch would be able to deal with. It's not being dealt with in this talk. Unfortunately, sadly, Ron has passed away, which is a great loss to us because he was sort of like our expert in this dissident group on GPS. Because you go to the mainstream, they just tell you that GPS works by Einstein's relativity. And Ron, who was a GPS engineer, worked on GPS. You would say, no, it didn't. It didn't work on Einstein's relativity. So, in a sense, the mainstream lies to us. Or the mainstream have deceived themselves into thinking that GPS works by Einstein's relativity. But to sort out that mess, we would have needed Ron Hatch, who's, let's say, sadly not with us. So Robert says, you are missing the point of relativity. That is the problem. So what point is that? I don't know what point he means. As you go, his next comment is about the two observers again, I think. So for any two observers, and this is Robert, for any two observers and automate accurate measurements, you have to select a coordinate system to resolve all measurement summations, space and time. Yeah. So in Einstein's relativity, they talk about things like that. What things look like, or measure, what are things observed to be from different reference frames. So Professor Harlem says, yes, that is Einstein idea. So I don't know what he's referring to there. It might be what Robert's talking about. So Jim says to me, Roger, GPS SANAC correction is fatal empirical failure too. And I said, we need Ron Hatch to give a talk on that, really. So something. it's just nonsense. Probably, Professor Harlem says it's just nonsense. Presumably, referring to Einstein's relativity is just nonsense. So, coming in with these conversations, you don't know where they're supposed to fit in with what other people are saying. So, Robert K says no. So I don't know who he's talking to. Is he talking to me or he's talking to somebody else on the thread? That is not Einstein's idea. That is how the world works. I don't know. Don't know what he means. So Professor Harlem says, I work on electromagnetic field. I can compute the electromagnetic field at any point as a function of time. I can include moving sources, moving observers, and moving scattering objects. Yes, and Einstein's relativity is supposed to deal with that, in particular special relativity. So, and then Professor Holm add on to what he just said. No need for transportation. It probably means transformation. And the next comment he says transformation. So he says so according to him, there's no need for these. I think he's saying there's no need for these Lorentz transformations. I think that's what he means. So next, relativity is just nonsense. By that, Einstein's relativity. He probably means Einstein's relativity is nonsense. So you got other relativity theories other than just Einstein. So just saying relativity is nonsense, you could be meaning just Einstein's relativity, or you could be meaning all relativity theories are nonsense. But I think in the point the earlier point was talking about the electromagnetic field. If you're just dealing with the electromagnetic field from one frame of reference, then you don't have to deal with the transformations. It's supposed to be if you're dealing with different frames of reference that you're dealing with the transformations. So this person says, Sona says, hi Roger, as long, ENY, do not see, they always say relativity is out of play. I don't know what, he's got a typo there, I don't know what that means. Mass alone, just do not make it. We need this, we need the 5 at play. I don't know what he's referring to there. You need to give a talk to explain what he's talking about. 5 is made of the 4 forces united to the center, so 2 plus 1 to the other. I don't think it's anything I've been dealing with here in this talk. I don't know what he's talking about. You need to give a talk on that. So Robert says you're leaving out the work. He probably means word, testable theory. I don't know what you mean. Oh. So skipping along now. Let's just put out this one. Newton nor Robert says Newton nor Galileo are using the word relativity in their frames. Time is the same for frames of reference. I think that's probably, to a certain extent, that's right. I don't know if they use the word relativity. I think they might have used the word relative. Like, Sona says Roger with Northern English accent. I don't know if my accent is that I'm from Bristol, so it's Middle England. I come from where the pirates used to come from. Bristol, good seaport. But then I moved south. English. It says here English question mark. English, don't know. England. And he said England question mark. I don't know. He's completely confusing me here. I don't know. He's got comments here, and I don't know. What's it? So see it in the cosmos. I don't see space-time bending, but rather see electromagnetic levels from. Oh, I think it's a typing mistake. Able, deep sky, sight, deep sight skies. Typos. So no, in the context of Einstein's general relativity, it's space-time curvature. So you just be talking about different theory. Let's see. So James says Newton knew that if gravity propagated as slow as light speed, orbits would quickly break it down. Let's pass on that. Just getting beyond what I've dealt with in this talk. I was pointing out some general things. It's a point to me. Jim says to me, Roger, there is a lot of confusion between the concept of Galilean relativity, which has existed even before Galileo, and the formal equations called Galilean. But that's one way of talking about it. How they defined Galilean relativity was after Einstein came up with special relativity. So they defined it by the Galilean transformations. And if you're going back to Galileo himself, he would have been talking about relativity in different way, probably. So yeah. So the evolution, what would be then be the evolution of Galilean relativity from how Galileo was talking about it to it becoming something different to what he was talking about. Oh, so the sponsors. Oh, so goodbye, Roger. Yeah, I think it's time to go. It's gone past 5 o'clock. I've gone on too long. So goodbye, everybody. Thank you. Ending stream now. Goodbye. Thank you. I think I covered most things. Yeah. End stream. Thank you.